And yes, without further ado, without intro music today, we are absolutely live on Three Women here on CIUT 89.5 FM. Your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. And today is the wrap-up show of the year. Can you believe it? It's been a year of political intrigue, of exciting things happening, both federally, provincially, and in the city. It's been a year where we've covered just a little bit of everything. And we thank you for your support, by the way, out there in Radioland. Thanks for listening in and thanks for tweeting. And by the way, if you want to tweet, even at this show, tweet me at CHERIDINOVO or on Facebook, of course. Always send me your opinions, send me your thoughts, because today it's wrap-up day with the A-Team. We have Andrea Houston and Ashley Csanady, and we're going to be talking about, yes, the year that was at Queen's Park. Also, we're going to touch a little bit on city stuff, of course, and maybe even a little bit on federal stuff in terms of what's happening. And hey, even maybe a little bit on what's happening south of the border, because let's face it, that's a race that's heating up. So first up, I've got Andrea Houston. You all know Andrea. She is a journalist extraordinaire, been around writing about everything for many, many years now, and particularly all things related to, we're in the month, Pride. So, Pride this year.
Hello. Yes, happy Pride Month.
Yes, and
it's a month. It's the first time it's a month. Yeah,
it's a month.
Which is very
and for
exciting.
the first time, the Pride flag was raised on Parliament Hill,
yes,
which was a moment.
I was there. I was actually there for that. It was very exciting. I was there for it was called the Dignity Initiative Roundtable. I was very honored to be invited to participate, and it was about 75 NGOs from all over the world, parliamentarians from all over the world, the LGBT envoy to the U.S., Randy Barry was there, and so cool. It was amazing. And who the guy who advises Obama on LGBT issues was there. It was like it was a very small conference, but we got to ask some really key questions and talk about LGBT foreign policy. It was so exciting. So the flag was actually raised to coincide with us being there. It was all planned, and it was a really beautiful moment.
Cool.
Symbolic. But sometimes symbolism is really important.
Important.
Absolutely.
And of course, C-14,
yes.
the bill that's going forward to the Senate at least. We don't know how it will fare in the Senate. There's still a lot of conservative senators in the Canadian political scene, but still,
I suspect it will pass. Not without maybe some debate from our friend Don Plett, who raised the most opposition to the first round. First, second, third, fourth. How many rounds now? 7, I think there's been for this bill. Yep. So hopefully Don Plett, cools his guns a wee bit. But we really need, and I mentioned this to some people at the conference as well. While this bill is so important and so critical, we need it passed. We also need to repeal C-36.
We need to pass gender identity and gender expression in all the provincial legislatures, because they cover far, far more than the federal bill does. I mean, this is something that's very symbolic, very important that it get done, but it covers only federal employees and federal jurisdictions like the criminal code, which is important.
We need a Toby's Act in every province.
But employment, housing, healthcare, the 3 big areas that affect most people's lives, you need that provincial action too. And Quebec took that action, but we still have a number of provinces who haven't. So we need that there. Cool. And Pride in Town, the theme this year.
Yeah, the theme this year is Come Sit With Us, which is a really cute play on Mean Girls and wearing pink on Wednesday and all those wonderful jokes from the movie. So it's great. It's cute. But what I really love about this year, I think, is really important is the inclusion and the importance of that is being placed on Black Lives Matter and that discussion, which is so critical that we talk about racism within the LGBTQ community. Because it's something that isn't talked about very much, and it's absolutely critical when we talk about intersectionality, that we bring people to the table. It's a big discussion. It's not just about any one particular group. It's about trans representation, trans two-spirited representation, making sure people of color are at the front of these discussions, and we don't leave anybody behind, because so much of the fight around LGBTQ rights, and certainly Pride, has been, unfortunately, about leaving people behind, about those fights will be won once these fights have already been won. Once marriage is that won, then we could finally talk about liberation for trans people. Well, we need to stop doing that. We need to raise everybody up and raise everybody's voices up.
Absolutely. So moving right along, we had a historic moment in Queen's Park this year, just a few days ago when the Premier of the province, Kathleen Wynne, offered an apology to First Nations. Were First Nations in attendance? They all spoke. Everybody made it quite clear, I think, even in the speeches, that this was the first step, not by any means a solution, that there was still much to do. And much was talked about after that about water, both drinking water and the water and where we get that water from. Hence, Grassy Narrows. Talk about Grassy Narrows, Miss Houston.
Yeah, this is such a huge story, especially with the backdrop of the crisis that's happening in these remote First Nation communities. That the Grassy Narrow activists were there on that day when she was making this apology. And you know what? The apology is important, and it's another symbol that we have to have, and those symbols are important. But you can't have an apology for past human rights abuses while ignoring the current human rights abuses on people. We can't have First Nation communities drinking water that is poisoned with mercury, and having those activists, those First Nation youth, kicked out of Queen's Park on the day that this was supposedly happening. And there's a reason why activist events and rallies open with an acknowledgement of the land. There's a reason why we acknowledge the fact that this is stolen land. That Canada's a colonized country. And so it's important that we recognize that this is unceded territory. And so the symbolism of Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals kicking out First Nation people off their land when they are only trying to raise up the voices of people who are,
especially after just giving an apology,
especially after the apology.
Nations, yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, I hope a lot of people saw this contradiction and saw how upsetting this was.
Well, what they've said in response to questions in the House about Grassy Narrows has been, Kathleen Wynne et al. Have responded that, we're very serious, we're looking at it, but basically kind of implying that they can't clean the mercury out of the water when, in fact, scientists have weighed in and said you can.
You can.
So now it's kind of we're working on it answer, which is pretty scary.
You can bet it would be happening. They'd be working on it very fast if this was a wealthy Muskoka community. They'd be working on this very, very quickly.
Yeah. And again, not having clean water to drink for most of their lives in many communities, not having places to live most of their lives, not having schools,
having to pay
that
$20
are operational
for a head of cabbage.
Yeah, I mean, and then having somebody like Cretin say, well, why don't they just move? Which is, really quite something.
Blinding. Willful, blinding ignorance.
I always think of, somebody in downtown Toronto who perhaps can't find a place to live, afford to find a place to live or find work, and somebody saying, oh, just, leave Toronto, leave your hometown, go somewhere else.
Just go somewhere else.
So that continues a piece. I mean, I can't believe they get away with this as long as they have both governments. And the other thing, of course, that happens is around First Nations and Aboriginal populations is like the ping pong game between the feds and the province. So the province will say, oh, well, that's federal.
Yep.
Or the feds will say, well, that's provincial. And so neither do anything. Now they're kind of running out of excuses because you've got majority Liberals, Queen's Park, majority Liberals in Ottawa. They've got the reins of power. They can do anything they want. Let's face it, majority government.
Yep.
So the question will be, why aren't they doing something?
Running out of excuses.
Hopefully, we see the backlash, not just the kids from Grassy Narrows, but from First Nations right across the way.
Well, we certainly will be as far as pipeline activism goes.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Pipelines, the Energy East line and Keystone XL. You thought it was gone? Nope. It's not. It's still there. And sadly, we have Canadian politicians shilling for this.
Yep.
Sadly, we do. I was just at an energy subcommittee meeting of state legislators in Minneapolis, which, yes, I know, Prince's birthplace. And believe me, I did pay homage. But also found myself sitting at a table talking with members from the Dakotas who produce coal, who were denying that climate change even happened, and thought Trump was just the cat's meow. So yes, climate crisis is very much with us, very much the case. And sadly, And sadly, we're looking at pipelines, and we're looking also at nuclear plants, by the way, and the refurbishing of nuclear plants in Ontario, which is to some scary too.
And government officials fully working around the treaties that have been established, just ignoring the treaty rights. I mean, this, on one side of the mouth, we have Justin saying, yes, crying, oh, we're going to be respectful of First Nations. And, this is a new era for government relations with First Nation communities. And then at the very next day, an announcement that says, well, it's negotiable. We can work around this. No, the treaties are there for a reason. And if First Nation communities say, no, this is going to impact our future generations to fish and hunt and live on these lands. And if you're willing to work around that and not take no for an answer, then what does it matter? Then what does it mean to say that you're going to work with communities? And what does it mean? It means it's all lip service and tokenism.
Well, we saw very, very clearly that stark contrast between the community where children were killing themselves at Attawapiskat and 90 kilometers away, De Beers diamond mine making a fortune, and justifying it by saying, well, but we hire some of them.
We hire some of them.
We hire some of them.
Their land.
While pillaging their land. So the pipeline, I think this will be continue to be a huge issue. And really the front line of that fight will be First Nations. Because,
and the blockades. And get involved in the blockades.
Like environmentalists have been saying no for a long time. But First Nations will be really the front lines of that. I was shocked to know that, and many Canadians and many listeners don't know this, that we subsidize hugely the oil and gas industry in this country and in the States, and that those subsidies, that part of the agreement that came out of Paris, that those subsidies will not end until 2025. You'd think that wildfires at Fort McMurray, which was another big news story, and flash floods and everything else that we're looking at across North America would be a kind of wake-up call to people that maybe we shouldn't subsidize oil and gas industries until 2025. Maybe we should start looking at renewables.
But you're not supposed to talk like that, Sherry, because of the jobs, Sherry.
Well, here's the thing.
Don't mean anything if the world is uninhabitable.
Here is the thing. Having come from this energy subcommittee, well, yes, we heard people saying that, there's no such thing as climate change. We also heard that Iowa, for example, 30% of its power comes from wind. Hawaii is almost 100% renewables as we speak. Of course, that's solar, and one can see why. A lot of the problem with the renewables has been storage, and the storage problem is being resolved. People are building these high-powered batteries, and this is happening. And in fact, one of the future visions is that we are all our own little generating station, that we all have a battery on our wall and solar panels on our roofs, and that we provide our own, which scares the utility companies.
Yes, it does.
I have to tell you, it scares the utility companies. But, interesting things. The Midwest in the States, they say, can be almost entirely fueled by renewables by 2050. It's just the will, and the will is fueled by money.
Yep.
And let's face it, at the end of the day, wind and sun are free.
Yep.
Oil and gas are
not.
So,
but we should have been.
So
this should have all been happening 20 years ago.
Yeah,
we're way behind.
The problem is, and I think for places like Alberta, where you've had an economy that's dependent on one issue, one resource, and the Dakotas and places like where they're dependent on coal, still in coal manufacture. There has to be this weaning away process. You have to wean off. It's like a junkie, really. You have to wean off the drug. But once you do, there are far more jobs. And this was very clearly highlighted in the presentations we heard from, very clearly highlighted that there are way more jobs in green economies, that they're actually labor-intensive jobs, whereas the oil and gas and nuclear industries, very few jobs are by contrast created. So,
and they're temporary.
Yeah,
often the oil, gas, and nuclear jobs are temporary. They're low pay. They're often using temporary foreign worker program. That and it's not a sustainable long-term job for people where they can raise families and build houses, their own property.
But sadly, we have this this problem. When I was on CBC. They had the head of the Alberta Labour Federation talking about how the LEAP manifesto was insane and that we needed to, jobs. This is shocking, I think. We really need to do a much better job, I think, on the left of talking to our union rank and file folk and our union leaders about this. Not all saying the same thing, but and really holding out the example of now's a good time. It wasn't the environmentalists that hurt the cost of oil. It was big oil that did that, all on its own. So, let's try to move away from a one resource economy and let's diversify so that there are jobs for the future. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I watched the NDP convention on TV, and some of the interviews that I heard from some of the labor activists, some of the labor people that were anti-LEAP really upset me for making the same arguments that you just made. That was like, no, I thought we were all on the same page with this.
But you have to. But, a very significant thing happened at that NDP convention. 60% voted to discuss LEAP,
I know.
even in the heart of oil and gas town.
Yes.
So there is that move. I think people get that building pipelines is just not the way we should be spending our money. Now, to convince everybody, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some other stuff that's happened. Meanwhile, talking about a natural resource, there were all these raids that happened at the marijuana dispensaries around Toronto. My goodness, say something, Miss Houston.
The police with guns were out in full force to collect up all those plants that people were growing and selling to people with HIV and AIDS and cancer who, needed this little plant that they smoked in the privacy of their own homes to, doing no harm to anybody. Were raided across the city, and it was, not just raided, but violently raided. Like windows were smashed,
arrested and charged.
So
90 charges. I think, for criminal activities.
Will have convictions on their record, but possibly preventing them from getting other jobs, traveling, crossing a border, all because of this one little plant that government feels, not even government, because we're in a gray area where government kind of maybe sort of feels that it should be legalized, but they're not decriminalizing it until Justin Trudeau decrees that it should be decriminalized. Nobody has a clue. At the meantime, though, a whole bunch of people, mostly people in poverty, mostly people of color, are being caught in the middle and criminalized.
And actually, thousands and thousands of people since the Liberals were elected have been arrested on pot charges. So, going to legalize. Do it because. But the other thing that happened there, which I think was kind of interesting, was really big business beating up on little business.
Absolutely.
Because you can still buy medical marijuana. You have to do it only from some producers by mail. I mean, this
from the government-approved producers.
The government-approved. And guess who will get those approvals? One can only wonder that it be friends of the government that will get these licenses to produce on a massive scale. I mean, we see this kind of, graft and corruption happening at all levels of government, but it's not immune to it at the federal level, of course. So, I mean, here's another case where small business, small entrepreneurs, we say we love entrepreneurs and small business, and then when they try, we slam them upside the head on the behest of big business, which is what's happening.
This is protecting corporate interests, right? That's what this is. Look, I'd like some of the journalists out there to, in Radioland, to maybe look at the lobby lists of who is, meeting with the premier, who is meeting with John Tory.
But didn't George Smitherman, who ran for mayor, didn't he say he was going into the marijuana producing business?
Yes. And
former Liberal cabinet minister. I wonder if he'll get the
if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the voices that were in support of Loblaws and or the LCBO selling marijuana, and I am so not in favor of either of those options. Like I think
I kind of like the LCBO. I mean, it's unionized.
I have to give Ashley credit because she's the one who said it first, and she absolutely right. The one time when we should be maybe not getting high and drinking, the alcohol and weed together can be dangerous. And we don't want to associate those two in people's minds. It's totally separate.
I'm listening.
And I think that, I agree with you in the sense that it's a organized, union organized shop being the LCBO, but I really don't think I want
the profits
them
go back to the public. That's all.
But then we're associating these
socialist.
Yeah, but then people associate these two together. And I don't think that's a healthy way to associate weed with. Yeah. I think weed is its own thing. I think it should be completely legalized. I think people should be able to grow it if they want. There's no reason. Why should I, as a recreational weed smoker, why should I be forced to go and engage in capitalism to basically smoke a plant? Yeah. But I can go into a convenience store and buy tobacco, which is way more harmful, which is next to to candy and chocolates and all these things are appeals to kids. So I really think this whole thing is just protecting corporate interests.
In Amsterdam, when I was there, they sell at every florist has you grow your own kit.
Yeah.
In every florist, so you can. I mean, it's obviously a very popular thing to do in window boxes in tiny backyards in Amsterdam.
They have it all figured out over there.
Yeah,
they really do.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting.
Copenhagen too. I watched last night, which you'd love, the documentary Bikes versus Cars. Highly recommend watching it. It's actually got unreleased or unseen Rob Ford footage for anybody who watches and follows municipal politics, and I know many of you do. But it talks about what we have done, the mistakes that we've made, and what we've done wrong here versus places like Copenhagen and the Netherlands and Amsterdam, and with regard to not just marijuana, but obviously bicycle infrastructure and municipal planning. But I know because we're all nerds here.
Yeah, exactly. In case you just tuned in, you are listening to Three Women, and we have the A team on today. We have Andrea Houston, and then coming up at the half hour, we're going to have Ashley Csanady, both journalists. Ashley from the National Post, Andrea from everywhere else, a little bit of everywhere, and talking about what's basically the year that was, because this is our last show before the summer break. So if you're tuning in, we'd love to hear your voice. If you have any questions, you can tweet at me at CHERIDINOVO at Sherry DeNovo, or Facebook for later reference, or you can phone in for that matter, 416-946-7000. Have your say on any of these topics. Let's talk. We talked briefly. I was down, as I say, in south of the border, talking to Americans. Some of them I was happy to talk to. Some scared me. So what do we think? Tomorrow's the California.
Yeah, tomorrow's a big day for our boy Bernie.
So what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, if you gauge it from the rallies that he's hosting, I mean, there's like 10, 25, I think there was a 30 or 40,000 person rally on the weekend. He's holding rallies all over the state of California. He seems to have the momentum behind him that it would take to possibly win this nomination, but it's very difficult to fight, a corporate machine, Wall Street, an establishment, a Democratic Party that has been so established. And this is a system that has been built this way for a reason. They installed superdelegates for a reason, specifically to prevent a movement like Bernie's from ever happening. So he should be the nominee. He has all the support, but he can't be because the system has been stacked against him.
I heard a very interesting analysis from a socialist lefty who said that, Bernie is actually was part of it's conspiratorial, I know, but part of the plan of the Democratic Party, because they knew there was such rank and file dissatisfaction with that kind of middle of the road corporatism that the Clintons represented, that they really needed a lefty to kind of try to drain off, that fervor and keep it within the party.
So do they think that Bernie would help Clinton?
That Bernie could do that, and then it would all just kind of fall into place behind Hillary. Needless to say, on the panel I was on, I took some issue with that.
Yeah.
Because I think there's something really quite genuine in that movement. But it does leave the question: what happens if it looks like it's going to be Hillary's? Let's just say it looks like it's going to be Hillary's.
It probably
so then what happens to all of that?
Failing an indictment. I mean, that is the wrench in the wheel, right? Like if she is indicted, what happens then, right? I read an article coming back from Ottawa a couple of days ago where they talked about what happens if she's indicted. They've already got Biden apparently waiting in the wings to slip in there. Anything to prevent Bernie from winning the nominations. I would be pissed. I would be so angry if I was an American voter. I've already cast my vote for Bernie in a primary. It was an open primary. I stood in line. I went through the democratic procedure, the position that's in place. And then all of a sudden, Biden, who didn't participate in any debates, didn't want to run, is only running to hold up the establishment candidate. If there's a reason to riot in the streets, that would be one of them.
I'm sure on the other side of the aisle, I'm sure on the Republican side, there are many Republicans saying the same thing about Trump.
Sure, absolutely, as they should.
Where is the other candidate that we can slip in at the last moment so we're not running with Trump?
And they're talking about people. I've heard of a number of names being thrown out.
Either way, I mean, it's going to be, I think...
Both conventions are going to be really fascinating to watch.
They will be. Lots of riots, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
like actual riots.
Lots of actual riots.
Yeah.
Blood will be shed. But, I mean, what's interesting, too, is that even if Bernie loses, which it looks like is in the cards, to me, he's really shifted the conversation in a dramatic way. I mean, the most looked up word in the dictionary online down there is socialism. Something like, I heard the stat, like 57 or 58% of the Democrats call themselves socialists now.
Wow.
Yeah, significantly high number. And millennials, of course, are heavily, like they are like 60 to 70% calling themselves socialists. So, I mean, he's retrieved the word, if nothing else.
And he'll have a voice at convention too, hopefully with setting policy, you know, like some of the discussions that are happening about, you know, he might officially be able to change from, you know, Hillary's $12 minimum wage position to officially $15. So if he shifts her on that, I know there's been discussion that he wants to make Palestinian justice a platform plank within the Democratic Party.
And free post-secondary.
If he achieves any of these things.
Like, what has she said? Like, she has said that's unrealistic, basically.
The free post-secondary? I don't actually know her position on that.
I'm not sure either.
I know she's moved on universal health care. I know she's moved further to his side on that issue.
Yeah. So hopefully if he again, I hope the panelist that I was debating with is not correct on this, and that there is a shift. I hope he's not just, the release valve for a lot of anger, and then everybody just goes home and doesn't vote, which is also possible. So,
but again, a lot will depend on tomorrow, right? Because if he wins tomorrow, if he wins even by like a fraction, like even if it's one of those like 0.5 or 0.1 wins, that's enough, right? That would give him enough political capital to really, have a dominant role at the convention.
Are in a dead heat, according to CNN.
A dead heat? No, absolutely.
Heat in the polls.
And it's an open primary. So even independence, which has always been for him, that has helped him take any primary that he's won has been an open primary.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to do halftime here on Three Women. We are talking about all things political, and we're doing a wrap-up of this last year and all the excitement that's been on this show and that we've witnessed. Again, if you want to tweet at Sherry DiNovo, CHERIDINOVO, can tweet in your comments, questions, concerns, or phone us 416-946-7000, or later, or now for that matter, on Facebook, same name. Send me your ideas, questions. We always take them into account, and we always listen. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and we will be back with Ashley Csanady from The Post.
Choose which path I take. Will it be darkness again, or a brilliant life I make? We are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are standing in the shelter of ancients. We are speaking the truth of the people. We are marching to the beat of one drum, one drum. The sounds you make. We'll speak here in many tongues. Join circle with your mask down. You will see the plans you make. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. We are standing in the shelter of ancients. We are speaking the truth of the people. We are marching to the beat of one drum. truth, speaking the truth, speaking the truth. We are marching to the beat of one drum, one drum. Way, yeah, hey, way, yeah, hey, way, yeah, hey, yeah. Way, yeah, hey, way, yeah, hey, way, yeah, hey, yeah.
Did you know there are now 8 different ways in which you can listen to your favorite programs on CIUT? From Barrie to Buffalo, Kitchener to Cobourg, you can pick us up on 89.5 FM. We also stream online at www.ciut.fm, on Rogers Digital Cable, Channel 946, Channel 970 on Bell 5 TV, Star Choice Satellite offers CIUT on Channel 826, and you can pick us up on the TuneIn Radio app and under College and Campus Radio on iTunes. Finally, you can listen or download CIUT program archives at ciut.fm. CIUT 89.5 FM, delivering the new sound of your city everywhere.
And welcome back. Yes, you are listening to Three Women. I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. And we have the A-Team. You've been hearing from Andrea Houston. And now we're delighted to have Ashley Csanady from the National Post on the line. Ashley, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're doing just a little recap. This is our last show of the year, coinciding with last week at Queen's Park. So if you were to look back, through these many months to September and on, what are the major issues? What sticks in your mind about this last year at Queen's Park?
I think the energy file in general, I'm sure you guys talked a lot about the Hydro One sale, but I think it's more than that. I think it's also billing rates. I think we learned there's yet another OPP investigation related to the energy file. Formal charges were laid related to the gas plant scandal from a number of years ago, and that case is now winding its way through the courts. The trial date has actually been set, but not till September 2017. So I think that's always going to be a big problematic file for any government in this province. The energy sector is just so big and so fraught, and I think if you try to move or change any of it, there's always going to be somebody who's unhappy. And I think there are some structural issues within our energy system as well that contribute to some of the higher rates that can't just be, waved away. And then, of course, sex ed ended up being its own issue at Queen's Park, for better or worse. I think it was a really positive move from the Premier that she ended up paying a slight political price for. I don't know whether that will linger by the time we get to 2018. Probably not, because by then it will have been taught for a number of years, and I think everyone will have calmed down. But, I wrote a poll story last week that said a sixth of Ontario parents either did or considered taking their kids out of school, and as many as 1 in 3 actually did so. And those aren't small numbers. And some of the ridings where it's been the most controversial are ridings where the Liberals are vulnerable, especially in, say, the 905 area around Toronto. So those are two big ones that stand out right away. Doctors continues to be a big fight between the province and the OMA, the Ontario Medical Association, when it comes to negotiating a new deal. I think everybody's seen or heard one of those ads by now, the woman saying, I'm an activist or I'm not an activist in an earlier version of the ad. So that's been a very public war on both sides, where they've both been trying to rally public opinion. That sort of seems to bubble up every now and then, but maybe isn't like a day-to-day news story in the same way, say, Hydro One and energy rates are. So those are 3 big ones right off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting many things that sort of came and went over those few months. Yeah.
Yeah. The real question is what might stick and what won't. We've been talking about other issues, so that's great that you bring those up. One of the issues that seems to be coming back and back and back again is the autism issue right now. I mean, yet again, parents were back in front of Queen's Park today for the 4th time, with the government taking kids 5 and over off the wait list, which essentially kicks them from a $50,000 a year subsidy down to an $8,000 a year subsidy potentially, which just doesn't cut it. Do you think that will have any lasting? I can't believe the government has not backed down on that, quite frankly.
Oh, I find this one so interesting because I feel like it's one of those areas where no matter what you do to try and reform it, someone's going to be unhappy. And I think that they have invested quite a bit of cash into this, but some of the changes, I think they needed to maybe do them a bit more slowly or grandfather people in more slowly. But it's just such a fraught issue that I feel like it'd be hard to reform it no matter what. And yet, all the experts, whether they say what the government has done is good or bad, because there is a bit of a dueling narrative there. Like, there are experts who say that they're doing the right thing over the long term. The problem is the kids who get caught in the middle in the short term. And perhaps they needed more of a transitionary period there. It sounds like they're starting to inch towards that. They have softened a little bit, because I do think the longer-term vision and the longer-term investment is all a really positive thing. And I think even the opponents would admit that. The problem is what's going to happen in the interim. And, fingers crossed the government is listening, and there won't be any kids who, were about to get services and now won't, because it's really not fair for them and for those families.
About 2,200
for them
of them
to miss out. Yeah.
2,200 of them. So, and they are really angry. And we've heard, at the Liberal nomination, Scarborough Rouge River, the police were called there. Of course, the member out in Mississauga who, called the police. And these were stories because, again, not 2,000 kids, that's not a lot of kids, I guess, in the great scheme of things. But I think people really feel it. If you're a parent of an autistic kid and you've been waiting for a number of years and all of a sudden, you don't get what you expected. It's a problem. But again, my sense too, like yours maybe, is that the government's going to soften this or pull back or do something, because honestly, this will just continue to fester if they don't.
Yeah. So I think that they'll try and move on away from that over the summer, try and maybe reset the communications a little bit. I think the pending cabinet shuffle might have something to do with that. I have a sense that that file in particular could end up having a new person in charge to try and reset the button on that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing, First Nations apology. We spoke about this a bit in the first half of this program. There was, good thing, symbolic. First Nations chiefs were there. Everybody was in attendance. Everybody thought it was a good thing. And then all of a sudden we've got the grassy narrows. And kids from Grassy Narrows getting kicked out of the legislature, and the government kind of giving a weird answers about that. Scientists seem to say you can clean up the water. What do you think? This is very true federally too, of course. On one side you've got overtures being made to First Nations in a way that maybe we haven't seen in a while. And then on the other hand, the practical day-to-day living of their lives, nothing much is changing.
Yeah, the Grassy Narrows one is such a fascinating one to me because it's been an issue for so long. To be fair to the government when it comes to them getting kicked out, I feel like that was more a decision by the legislature than the government, and they are supposed to be separate. I think it was a silly one, but they made the decision that their T-shirts somehow violated the rules of having any kind of signage or protest in the legislature. I kind of, on a personal level, maybe disagree with that a little bit, but that was a decision that I guess the Sergeant-at-Arms and the Speaker's office probably made that call. That said, the Grassy Narrows issue, I don't think there's any government that is doing enough on repairing the situation in our First Nations. You really can't do it fast enough when you see the kind of crises that we've been seeing in Ottawa-Pisgat, when you see the situation that has been ongoing in Grassy Narrows for decades now. But there are also complex files to move. You can't just suddenly build a community center in a place as remote as Ottawa-Pisgat, and I think cleaning water is a really, really complicated thing to actually go about doing. But, is the money there? Is it being spent? I think those are important questions, and it's something that I think both the province and the feds have made a lot of good promises, and I think we need to see it follow through. Just a couple weeks ago, we saw a huge announcement of healthcare dollars from the province towards remote First Nations, and that was actually really important because it was a province taking ownership of it when they could just say this is a federal problem and they should be coughing up more dollars. So I think that was a positive thing to see that move. Now the question is whether we make sure that money actually flows and goes to something useful and makes a difference. So it is good to see the beginning of ownership. But yeah, I do share some of the cynicism and skepticism when it comes to these.
Now, on
those
health
issues.
care and the doctor, the fight with the OMA, this is, the government spin is doctors make too much money and our health care is too centralized in big hospitals, so we're going to kind of somehow move it out from there. The opposition saying, but the reality is there's not enough beds, hospitals are overcrowded, they're underfunded, and really you haven't been dealing with the doctors in a serious manner and at the negotiating table. What do you think, Ashley Csanady? What do you think?
Oh, so on the hospitals, I think that the big problem there is they tried to move things to the community too quickly, and they didn't have it set up well enough. So then the hospitals ended up being, overburdened without the support because people were supposed to be taken care of in the community, but they weren't. So I think that the hospital community care thing, we have this big strategy put out last week. I confess I haven't dug into it as much as I would like, but it does seem to be a positive move when it comes to dealing with the whole community care issue. I just think that they sort of tried too quickly to cut the hospitals without having the infrastructure set up to make it so people don't need to be in a hospital as much. Because I don't think most people, if you gave them the chance of whether they were going to heal at home or heal in a hospital room, I think most people would want to heal at home, but they'd also want to know that they're getting enough care to do so. I think it's sort of one of those situations where maybe they had the best of intentions that fell apart in execution. Now, when it comes to other training doctors, I'm a little bit torn on this one. So I think there are a lot of doctors who are paid a lot less than those big numbers we see. I think a lot of our family doctors, a lot of people sort of in the middle who we actually see day to day aren't paid a lot. I think where there's a big problem right now is there are doctors in very unique specialties that are making ridiculous sums of money because they can perform dozens of surgeries in a day, like cataract surgeries, because the technology has changed. And the fee codes, how much they get paid per procedure, hasn't changed to keep pace with that. And the OMA represents all doctors at once, and I'm not sure that actually benefits all doctors equally. I think in some ways some doctors are more equal than others in Ontario. And even there's a bit of a gender divide in how our doctors are compensated in Ontario. And that's concerning to me. Even within, say, obstetrics, some of the top paid obstetricians in this province happen to be men, not women. And I think that those are issues we need to talk about and consider going forward.
So let's cast our. Andrea's still here, by the way. So Andrea, if you
Hi,
want to
Ashley.
weigh, if you want to weigh in, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Three Women. I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo. We have the A team here, two of them at any rate, Ashley Csanady and Andrea Houston, both columnists and writers extraordinaire. And we're talking about the last year in politics. And so, Ashley, let's cast our net a little wider because we did in the first half, and let's look. For example, at the municipal police raids on pot dispensaries. What do you think?
Oh, I'm so mad about this.
Me
I'm
too.
so mad about this. So I live in a part of the city where I probably don't go a week without seeing a crack deal go down, and I've never seen cops bothering them. And that has always been stuck in my mind and really, really bothered me when I was watching these pot raids go down. Is the lack of policing that I see on the pot front. The lack of policing that I see on a hard drug front around my neighborhood. Like I see people who work corners who are there very consistently, and they don't ever seem to be getting bothered. And that to me is a lot more concerning than someone selling, clean, often organic pot to people who quite often do see some sort of medical practitioner to join the club. It might be a naturopath, it might not be a medical doctor, but they are going through some steps and proving that they're of age and proving that they have a reason that they want to be consuming this. And, they're getting penalized. I still don't understand what that was about. And the number of people that I know that are outraged about this, I know people who aren't even necessarily pro-legalization that are outraged about it because they think it was just a waste of police resources. I saw people who basically held their nose and voted for John Tory because they didn't want Doug Ford to win, that are now posting all over Facebook like, this is exactly why I was wary of him. This is why I will never vote for him again. Actually, I think that John Tory took a big hit as a reasonable sort of moderate person in that. and it's sort of confirmed a lot of people's worst assumptions that he was a secret super conservative all along.
There's no secret about John Tory's conservatism, but anyway.
No, but he was seen as a moderate conservative. You know what I mean? Like,
I think that ultimately, though, with regard to your point about crack, I think this really speaks to the fact that we need to decriminalize all drugs. Drugs should not be criminalized. We should not have police busting down people's doors. This is a health issue. We need to make sure that if people are truly addicted to drugs, that they aren't put into the justice system, that they get the health and treatment that they need, and that they're treated with compassion and care. And this is absolutely disgraceful that we are putting people who need health care into the justice system and in chains. Disproportionately people of color and people who are in poverty. And it's disgraceful. And John Tory's conservatism was clear as day, and I could have called this from day one before the election happened, and I'm so mad because I see is corporate hands and dirty fingers all over this.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting one. I've been told from a number of places since this happened that there were some talking points in the police chief press conference that were apparently directly lifted from the lobbying efforts on behalf of some of the most prominent corporate interests in the pot system. Your big companies that have those Health Canada licenses have some powerful lobbyists on their side, and apparently a lot of the police chief Mark Sanders' language sounded very familiar to a lot of people who worked on those files.
Which is what I posted, that it's really big business beating up on little business, and that's using the police as their go-between, which is, we could argue that this is not the best use of our very expensive police force.
Not when a pregnant woman is being gunned down on our streets. We need resources to investigate things like this and to get guns off our streets, not criminalizing, a pothead.
Okay, so Ashley, I just came back from a couple of days in just south of the border at a energy subcommittee meeting, and it was very entertaining in many ways. But one of the things was quite clear: there is an American election on. What do you think's going to happen tomorrow, California, and on?
Oh goodness, I don't even know anymore. Honestly, I think right now what would be a really smart move for the Democrats would be to come together as one ticket and have Sanders as Clinton's vice president, and he could sort of be that lefty, social conscious voice to her, more moderate.
Do you think he'd actually agree to that? I can't see him agreeing to that.
I can't see him carrying a general. So I think that if they want to sort of create this bigger tent on the left, it might be a smart way to do it. I also never thought I'd see Elizabeth Warren going to bat for Hillary as hard as she is now, right? So
no, it's true. Yeah, I wanted to see Elizabeth Warren run. I thought she would be a much stronger candidate.
But regardless of what happens now, I think it's a stop Trump moment. It sounds like I saw some speculation today that Obama's just itching to get out there, but he needs to wait for the party to finish its process to do so. I think the party needs to finish that process. I don't think more uncertainty is going to help anything. I'm also not shy about the fact that I'm a sort of a reluctant Hillary supporter. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, she's not perfect. There's a lot of problematic people she's taken money from. But I think when you look at America,
that question Andrea asked about what if she's indicted?
Yeah, I don't think she'll be indicted. But then again, I didn't think that there's a lot of things I didn't think that would end in indictment. But I think that I would like to see some unification within the party. If we're going to try, if they want to be the grown-ups at the table, then maybe it's time to be the grown-ups at the table and put aside your differences and work together. And maybe the simplest way to do that would be to have a Clinton Sanders ticket, as weird as that might seem.
Okay, so let's just cycle back to Canada on that note. The polls in Ontario now, 2 years away from an election. You're now part of the Queen's Park Press Corps, and we're happy to see your face there. Wynne must be worried. She's really down in the polls. She's not popular as a leader. Patrick Brown, popular. up in the polls, even though people don't quite know who he is.
I don't think you can take anything from that, though, because you have over half the respondents saying they don't know who he is.
Yeah, well, there is that. There is that.
I just don't like her.
But the brand, but just in general, you're getting this kind of. Now, I have to say that having been around this track a while now, we've seen this before, and then the Liberals pull it out of the hat. At the last moment. What do you think is going to happen? I know we're 2 years out and anything can happen, but it must be pretty scary for some of them. I mean, the backroom kids must be, kind of rolling up their sleeves in the Liberal Party and thinking, what can we do to make Kathleen Wynne look better?
Well, I think that's part of the reason why we have, the expectation of a cabinet shuffle over the next couple weeks. I've been told the week of June 19th is sort of the one now that everyone's looking at. And that's to refresh the face of the party. I mean, she does have some cabinet ministers who have not been performing well on some files that blew up and didn't necessarily need to. I think the autism therapy one's a really good example of that. I think that could have been better handled from the beginning, and it wouldn't have become as much of an issue. As much as I respect Minister McCharles as an individual, I don't think the communications on that file has been great. I also think that we've had a couple little gaffes that turned into their own stories from other ministers. One of them that stands to mind is when Education Minister Sandals said, "Well, we know how much pizzas cost," and they were talking about the payouts, the $1 million to some of the teachers' unions to cover their costs. I think when you're looking down the road 2 years away, it is a long time. I think the Liberals have, for the past 2-3 elections, gone in with terrible polling numbers. Something's happened on the campaign, and they've swung back into their favor. People will go towards the devil. They know, especially in Ontario, we're a very moderate province. They'll have 2 years to put between themselves and some of their more controversial decisions. I think that the last big controversial move they're going to make will be this climate plan, and in the next 2 years are going to be implementing all these big things and selling them to the people. And that really does give them a lot of runway to move past the skepticism stage into the sort of the acceptance. I think that part of the problem is, okay, so who are the alternatives? I mean, no offense to your party or its leader, but Ms. Horvath has been through a number of elections. People have seen her, and we haven't seen a massive swing in her direction at this point. What would change between now and 2018 on that front? When you look at Patrick Brown, I think people still don't necessarily know him. That can be a good thing. There are, past premiers who've gone into an election campaign as the unknown and then emerged on the other side. The problem is he doesn't have a compelling personal story, and Wynne very much does. And she's I'm curious to see the two of them together on a debate stage and how he'll look.
And he also has already contradicted himself in the eyes of some voters. He ran on a leadership race as a very social conservative politically, and gathered sort of all these new memberships based on a couple key social conservative issues, sex ed being one of them. And then all of a sudden in the legislature we see a completely different Patrick Brown who has shifted much more further to the center. And I've heard from many of those people who supported him, those social conservatives, they're feeling left in the lurch. So it'll be interesting.
I've been seeing a lot of that. Yeah, a lot on social media. I've been getting some emails actually when I've been writing about curriculum and stuff, and people are like, "What happened to Patrick Brown as the guy who was going to champion against this?" I think that's a really important point too. So if you wanted those, in those situations, it's not like the social conservatives are ever going to turn around and vote Liberal or NDP.
They'll stay home.
The question is how motivated they are. Are they going to door knock for them? Are they going to get their whole church to come out? Things like that, right? And those little bits of emotion can make a big difference on the ground game in a provincial election.
But isn't part of his task really to make the Conservative Party less scary? Because when you look at their last couple of losses, it's because they got scary. John Tory, faith-based funding, everybody freaked out. Tim Hudak going to fire 100,000 people freaked out. I mean, I think his job, he's moving to the center is to just kind of sound Bill Davis-like, in the sense of, don't worry, we're really not scary. We're not going to do anything dramatic that's going to, affect you in any dramatic way. We're going to be, we're going to be Bill Davis conservatives. I mean, to really win, he's got to do that, because let's face it, the truly social conservatives, they're not maybe a dying breed, but there's less and less of them. No?
Yeah, and I think he sort of, there's an American mantra where you run to the base in the primaries and then swing to the center in the general, right? And I think that's what he did. Is in the leadership race, he went and re-expanded the base in the way that the federal conservatives did into a lot of conservative cultural communities that felt neglected by the liberals or betrayed by them on some files, and got them back into the party fold. And I think if he can hang on to them, that could be a big game changer in 2018. And I think putting himself forward, I think the idea is to make himself a Bill Davis conservative. That's really what Christine Elliott, his chief rival in the leadership race, wanted to do. The problem was she was saying that from the beginning. So instead of working to win over the base, she was running for the center right away. I guess the question is whether people will believe him.
But the scary thing is that, I mean, the reality is, like, to win leadership, it's about selling memberships, and he was clearly way better at doing that in terms of bumping up the membership. So you got to do that. I mean, we just saw that in Scarborough Rouge River, where know Rathika, of course, there were some in the NDP who were just kind of jumping up and down with joy that she didn't win that nomination. But I mean, so she crossed the aisle. But I mean, but the reality is, her opponent sold a whole lot more memberships and got a whole lot more voters out to that meeting.
And that's the stuff that really matters. I think one of the interesting things, though, is Brown did say he wanted to build a more open, inclusive party, but we are hearing rumblings that his party sort of got heavy-handed in making sure that Raymond Cho got the nomination for them. And I think that's something he said he wasn't going to do. So we are starting to see some cracks in that. I think for me, I guess the question will be whether voters believe him that he's had this about-face change of heart. I think his handlers think they successfully distanced him from some of his more damaging votes when he was a federal MP. I mean, he voted for right-to-work legislation. He voted against gay marriage. He voted to reopen the abortion debate. And I think that they believe that he's managed to move himself away from that. But I think that's actually a false comfort on their part, because Ontario voters do not pay attention to Queen's Park between elections in the same way they do municipal or federal politics. So actually, I find the horse race numbers are very misleading. People are probably disgruntled with some stuff that's gone on, so that wears on the premier. But the second they're actually paying attention and giving people a look, I think some of Patrick Brown's baggage is going to weigh down on him a lot more than his handlers think it will right now.
I agree.
Okay,
completely.
so last couple of minutes, we just have a couple of minutes left. But so what should Andrew Horwath do then to make inroads, do you think, Ashley?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think maybe there's something that they tried to do with Hudak and didn't work, but she could maybe pull it off a little bit more, is sort of a Horwath 2.0. Let her come out and have a little bit more of that social justice rallying cry, a bit more. I mean, you have the Tory leader being super pro-union these days. You got to be careful. You can't. You guys should be maybe even louder about some of those issues. Some of the precarious work, carding. I think there are some issues where your caucus has done some good work, and as the leader, she's been a good voice on them.
It's great that she's for $15 minimum wage.
Finally.
Yeah, but some of it's, a little late for some people.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's a little late. I mean, now she should be advocating for a living wage, right? Now, now we should be going further, guaranteed minimum income is what we should be talking about.
And, where's the being the moral conscious on some of the issues like donations or climate? These are just areas we're not necessarily hearing her. You guys have done a lot on the Hydro One file, and I get that, but I also think that at this point, that's sort of baked into the numbers. It's not going to get reversed. I know people really hope it will. It's not. And I think that she needs something to be her bailiwick for the next 2 years, and I'm struggling to think of what it could be. But
the marquee issue.
let us know if you ever figure it out, because we are happy to hear. Okay, so we are going to wrap up. Listen, people, have a wonderful